Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is David Zobell, and I'm the Director of Education here at Signature Theater. I want to welcome you all to the first Inside Signature of this season. Hope you all had a great summer. Glad to have you back. For those of you who've never been to one of these events before, the format's pretty simple. After I give a couple of announcements about upcoming things, I'll introduce our special guest and ask questions of him. If at any point, for those of you that are here in person, you have a question, just raise your hand good and high, and I'll call on you at an appropriate moment. For our friends watching at home, if at any point you have a question, just throw it into the chat, and a staff member will pass that question on to us at an appropriate moment. So, things that are going on right now at Signature as we kick off this season. Soft Power closes on the 15th. Out of curiosity, those in person, who has seen it so far? Hey. Wonderful. Who has not? Come on. Okay. You got a week. You got a week and a half. It's excellent. It's fantastic. I was saying to Steven before we came in, it's really funny and then packs a punch out of nowhere at the end, and that I feel like it really earns. Other things going on here at Signature. Primary Trust goes into previews on September 10th. Very excited about that. And next month's Inside Signature will be a cast member from Primary Trust, Julius Thomas III, and we're excited to sit down and chat with him. We have with us right now Steven Eng, who is appearing in Soft Power. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. I'm excited about this.
Oh, let's talk life story a bit first. Where are you from originally?
Sure. Born and raised Houston, Texas.
Awesome.
And kind of jumped around in the sense that, born and raised there, undergrad, work in Dallas, left for New York to become an actor. Almost just not too long after arriving in New York, I landed a job in Germany. So I moved to Germany, toured around Germany and Austria, got a show in London, so worked in London for a while, and then back to New York, which was my original intention. So finally got back there. And except for a stint of grad school, in which I came here in George Washington here in DC, yeah. I've pretty much been a New Yorker.
And grew up in Houston. When did you get bitten by the bug? When did performing find you?
Well, it's funny how it happens, because my earliest memory of performing was playing Moses in the church play. I was 5.
Amazing.
And I remember all these kids in the background. There was this big sheet of paper with paint, parting of the sea, but doing plays in school, and then ultimately deciding to pursue it in college. So both of my degrees, my bachelor's and my master's, are in acting. And but I would say probably most importantly was having the support of my parents.
That's great.
Because both my parents were immigrants, really limited means. So I suspect the last thing they ever wanted their child to do was to go into the theater, if they even really knew what that meant. Because they did difficult jobs, labor jobs, and but anyway, they came to every school play, they came to every choir concert that I was a part of, and just really supported me. I think because I guess they saw how much it meant to me. So I would say that's kind of how it all came about, why I landed where I landed right here.
And what did you love about it growing up? What about the art form of acting and theater? What spoke to you doing it?
I think I thought a lot about this actually. How did I keep choosing to do this? I think I got a lot of positive reinforcement, not just from my parents, but school teachers. For example, some would say, read this, or there'd be a school play and they say, read this. And they would say, oh, I think you can do this. I think at least, there's some kind of presence that they felt maybe just as a child that I somehow connected to reading words. And things just kind of came, including like playing Farmer Brown in the 3rd grade, and all of my classmates were vegetables, But I was the farmer.
Right.
The little Chinese boy was the farmer, and everybody else were vegetables.
I love it. Yeah, totally.
I don't know.
It stays with you, clearly. Right.
But I think it was the kind of the reinforcement I got of value. Not the reinforcement of being an actor, but that I was doing something that people were valuing. I was getting that reinforcement. And I think it just kind of developed into some confidence, maybe developed into feeling like I belonged doing something. That's
great. That's beautiful. And you said, like you said, you did grad school here in DC. Tell us about that program.
Oh, it's the George Washington has an MFA program that is tied, it's called the Academy for Classical Acting, tied to the Shakespeare Theater Company. And what it is, it's an MFA program that is concentrated on the classics. I would say roughly 80% of our curriculum was Shakespeare. The other 20% was probably the Jacobeans that subsequently followed Shakespeare. And so all of our training was with those texts. So that was my grad school experience, with a focus on what they were calling classical acting, however you want to define it, but that's what they were calling it. And it was really a deep dive into studying Shakespeare and learning how to embody it, learning how to communicate complex ideas, learning how to act really dense texts that really demanded a complex human experience. It's one of those puzzles that you never solve, but it's a continual exploration of words and the power of words. So, and I was very lucky. Very early on, I developed a huge love of Shakespeare text as a child. Well, high school.
Yeah.
That I really developed that, so it just kind of followed along.
And looking at your resume, you've managed to avoid being pigeonholed. I feel like most people end up doing one type of thing. They do musicals or they do plays. So you have managed to have Shakespeare and Sondheim and everything in between. Have you managed in your career to avoid pigeonholing? And
well, I guess the truth is we just make choices. We just make choices about doing things that matter to us. I could choose a project because I'm really curious about it. I could choose a project because, oh, that's a great job. Look who's writing it. I don't know what it's about, but look who's writing it. Yes, of course I want to do it.
Yeah.
So I follow, or at least I've been lucky enough to be asked to do work that excites me. And be it a musical, be it a classic play, be it a contemporary play, I've had that good fortune. So I don't really know if I've necessarily dictated where my career was going.
Good for you.
I was fortunate enough that, I guess, based on auditions or based on how people have recommended me, that I've been asked to do a decent, a diverse bit of work.
Do you have a preference between plays and musicals as an actor?
No. As long as it's well written. As long as I read something that I identify, wow, that's really human.
Yeah.
Can I bring that out? That's what appeals to me most.
That's great. Love it. I saw a question in the front. Yes.
I was just going to say, I assume you learned sword fighting.
I did.
And my second part of the question is, have you ever used it? I mean, how often do you use sword fighting?
Okay, so to repeat for our folks back home, the question was, assuming you got some sword training in school, and how often do you get to use that as an actor?
I did, as part of our curriculum, which of course is combat, I was also part of a certification for the Society of American Fight Directors in particular combat weapons, 3/4 staff, rapier dagger. Those were things I had to get certified in. I took the class, then I got tested in it, and got a certification. It's probably outdated now. but yes, that was a significant part of my training. And as far as how often I've gotten to use it, I've gotten to use it a decent amount, but nowhere near as often as I've wanted. And certainly as I've gotten older, I haven't exactly been expected to be battling on the fields of England. So, but I will say I've been very fortunate to have done shows where I've got to do some intricate fighting with weaponry. So those are really, really great memories for me.
Fun. Judith, please.
You have a very unique role in that the person that you play, David Henry Hwang, was actually here during the rehearsal period. I was fortunate enough, I got to talk to him for about 15 minutes, and it was a pleasure, and I learned things. What was it like? What were your conversations with him like, and that relationship?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's jump to talking about soft power. You play the playwright, the actual playwright, and it's one thing to play a real person. It's another thing to play a living person. It's another thing to play the living playwright, right? Talk to us about approaching this character, and were there nerves for you in the room? Talk to us about playing DHH.
Well, first of all, sure. Of course, there were nerves, and I think the nerves mostly stemmed from wanting to do the work justice. It wasn't, will he like me? It wasn't, I mean, it has passed my mind. I hope I don't make any choices that insult him. But I would say I wanted to honor him. And what that means is, as we were going through the rehearsal period and he was changing the scenes, changing the dialogue, every time I would look at a change, I would try to understand, what is it that's going through his brain? Why has he written this? Because sometimes we didn't get a chance to talk about it, and sometimes we did. But there was always okay, I am speaking in his voice. So what is it? What is his intention on these lines? Do I recognize, an absurdist observation that he's made in a scene? And if I can recognize that, I hear him saying that. How can I communicate that? So it was really pretty much always about the work. And what I mean by that is, how do I fulfill what it is that he's trying to communicate, and adding on my own version of it. He was, first of all, really lovely to work with, so open, and with such a keen eye. And he would always go through Ethan, the director, to if there was something that he felt like I was missing or needed adjusting, or if he had a different take on a line that perhaps I was not delivering on. So he was incredibly respectful to the actor's process, particularly in a show that is evolving, because there was an earlier version of soft power, but our version of soft power here at Signature is significantly different. And with the rewriting, the refocusing of themes that I think he and Janine were really concentrating on, because of that, there's ample opportunity to confuse the actor. Because there's change going on, and the actor isn't necessarily privy to why the change is happening. We just get new pages, new dialogue, and it's our job to make it alive. And I think he was very respectful of that responsibility on me as an actor. So he would always go through Ethan to make sure, Ethan, who was directing me, who was guiding me through the scenes, that not only was his note legible, but that it was purposeful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was a great privilege. And you might hear me say that word again and again and again, because I really do consider this opportunity that I've been given here a significant privilege.
Please.
Question. What grade did you say you were starting?
How old were you when you did your first play?
I was 5 when I was Moses.
Okay.
Second part of the question is, do you feel like you were extroverted before and that helps you be an actor? Because I didn't escape. My real personality is. So getting into a role is how I escaped doing that. So I wondered if which wasn't for you. If you were already extroverted and you said, gee, this is fun, or did you?
Right.
Yes, let's talk about personality and acting.
Yeah. Well, depending on who you talk to, I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
So, and I say that because I believe we as people, we're just so complex.
Mm-hmm.
And any kind of label is really an attempt to really understand. So what I will say is that as a child, just as I am today, I think, there are moments where I'm potentially really quite much of an extrovert, where I want to communicate and I want to connect. And there are many times where I'm very much an introvert, where, I don't go out much, I don't socialize much. And, but, to me, I'm just trying to live in the moment. So honoring whatever I'm feeling. And I think as a child, when I'm not aware of that, I think I just kind of go through it. Meaning there are those moments where I'll probably be the traditional good Chinese boy and just be quiet and obey the parents. And I did that. I did that. And then there were other parts of me as a child that just jumped into things because not only was I given permission, but I was given encouragement by school teachers, the people, whoever decided to put on the school play, the one who said, oh, for some reason, this little boy should be Farmer Brown, and it's just things like that I think brought out sides of me that I think balanced that part that wanted to stay quiet, didn't want to take any attention, and I still have that. I still have those two sides of me, and I think all the way from childhood.
David, please.
Picking up on what you just said, I think the two parts of Steven Eng are beautifully encapsulated. And you look at the photo here in the playbill, you're ready to be an investment banker on Wall Street. And then when you're on stage, your hair is electric. It is very much DHH. It's just boom. So, do you feel when you go on stage and you get yourself in costume and your hair rises up to the heavens, does that signal you're taking over the new personality?
I don't know how to recap that question. You stumped me, David. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'll put it this way, including the hair. I was focused on bringing him to life. I feel like that is my responsibility. And so I'm not conscious or necessarily aware of coming to life on stage versus off stage. I see it as this is my responsibility. This is my service to those who have come to see this show, that I must do this. And the fact, the whether or not I'm tapping into, being on stage and there's, energy versus being off stage where I'm, not quite energized. I don't know if there's any conscious decision in that. So, and that includes the hair. I consider all these little things that I do in preparation to get on stage as part of my responsibility and service to the piece. And so part of that service is maybe comes out as energy and focus. Hopefully I'm focused. Does that kind of answer that? So there's no so I don't necessarily make a conscious decision of here we go, pick up that energy, but it's really okay. I have a task to do, and this is how I'm going to fulfill that task.
When you're playing a character like DHH or any character that is somewhat inspired by a real person, do you feel an obligation to impersonate or to pick up mannerisms from the real DHH or anything like that?
Sure. That's a tricky question because my ultimate goal is to serve the piece.
Right.
That is my ultimate goal. So with that in mind, I have to decide what's going to fulfill that. So part of that is because David is a living, breathing human being who is standing in front of me or sitting in front of me throughout most of the rehearsal. What's going to fulfill that? Am I going to impersonate, or am I going to consciously choose not to impersonate? So part of the decisions that I made for at least our production here was I knew very early on I wanted to try to look like him. I knew that early on because I was aware, having seen previous productions in New York of Soft Power and Yellowface, the Off-Broadway production, where David wrote himself as the character DHH. I know those actors who played him. I know them. And they don't look anything like him. And for some reason or other, that was just a choice. They didn't need to in order to do this. I consciously, from the very beginning, said, I want to try to look like him. I also made the conscious decision not to feel a need to imitate.
Great.
I already felt that because I was speaking his words, and as long as I did my best to try to fulfill what he was trying to accomplish with those words that are in his voice, I will be hopefully seen and heard as David without necessarily needing to pick up his mannerisms, be they with the voice or with the body. That if I just spoke his words as truthfully as I could, and sometimes I did ask myself, and actually sometimes this was a note from Ethan, how would David say this? And so there were moments in the show, in the rehearsal time, where I had to ask myself that, I can say this line in many different ways. How might David say it? How I might visualize, how might I hear him say these words? And let's try that and see if that works. But for the most part, I made the conscious effort not to do an imitation because I already felt if I can speak his words truthfully from me, the audience will hear that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, trusting that Ethan would guide me if he felt like a choice that I was making was not necessarily fulfilling the needs of the scene or the needs of the story. In which case, he might come to me, which he did on occasion, and say, how might David say this? And I had to just really think about it. And I thought, okay, let's try this. Still without an imitation, but more so with the intention. What is David's intention of saying this line?
That's great. Please.
The hair brings another question. You work closely with the costumers. Every time you put on a pair of shoes or a coat, you go, that's my character.
Yeah, so talk about your relationship with the costume design and what input an actor has and doesn't have.
Oh, I think, well, first of all, costume designer, Helen, wonderful. I worked with her previously on a production a few years ago, another musical. And I know her to be very open to suggestion. And she's always asking, how does this feel? You know, how is this working? And fortunately, I didn't find any difficulties with her design during my fittings as I was checking to see the movement of how I moved, how I felt in those clothes that she had chosen. I felt very much at ease. So the choice of the hair which was the wig designer as opposed to the costume designer. The wig designer, I had conversations with her very early on, many weeks before I arrived here for rehearsal. And she was just checking in, wanted to know what my hair or what I looked like to see what she had to work with. And fortunately, I haven't had a hair. And I said to her, my first communication with her was, I said, I want to try to look like David, the best that I can, just to kind of honor the human that he is. And so, and she was all for it, because she said she had told me she had some conversations with the costume designer about possibly the hair too, because many of the hair in this show are wigs that were created for these actors. But fortunately, I have enough hair on my head to kind of mold it or sculpt it into trying to make it look like David's.
I love it. Barbara, please.
Yeah, I have to tell you this little story that I went to.
Wait, Barbara, if you're going to tell a story, come up and tell it in the mic so we can pick it up at home.
Oh, no.
No? Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
I came to the first night of previews, pretty much got it all. Then I was invited to the opening night on a Sunday, I believe it was, and you're not going to believe this, but David passed by me going up to his seat, and I thought, well, what is the actor doing in the audience? that just, I thought, I don't get it.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I didn't tell my friends. I thought, well, because they'd not seen it yet. But I thought, okay, I think I'm figuring it out. You look so much, y'all look so, and he came to me like he knew me or something. I thought, well, I thought they were doing something weird and on opening night. You
That's
got
funny.
him perfectly. Y'all were, well, he got you. Amazing, the look. There's no whole look. Yeah.
Well, I will say, I actually consider it very much a compliment when I am mistaken for him.
Yeah.
I consider it a compliment because, at least in my eyes, that means I'm doing my job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I've had quite a number of audience members after the show think that I was him. And I would say, actually, I'm the actor that was hired to play him. But I'm very grateful that you think that. And again, that means that I'm doing my job.
I love it. Maybe we've kind of gotten ahead of ourselves. For the uninitiated, for folks here at home who have not seen the show, what is Soft Power? What is the show about?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will do my best not to divulge anything that I think I would want you to wait for to come see the show. Basically, it is it's about David having trouble writing a show that he's been commissioned for by a Chinese producer. I'm not giving anything away. There's a horrible incident where he is attacked, and as a result, his mind goes into a fever dream. And in this fever dream, it takes place this whole play takes place during the lead up to the 2016 election. And much of the fever dream is how he grapples with many of the issues that get introduced at the beginning of the play, in terms of Chinese and American exceptionalism, our responsibilities as communities to care for each other, and about what happened, the outcome of the 2016 election, and how, from his perspective, he processed what happened, and that all comes out in the show. So it's quite complex. It used to be even more complex.
Yeah.
Its original version was really complex because I saw it when I originally saw it, and I think actually Janine and David have done a really, really remarkable job of really honing this piece so that its voice as a piece is so much more clear. so much more, so much more effective at communicating, I think, what it wants to communicate. I realize I'm kind of being a little vague about it, but it's an interesting piece.
It is.
I think
It
it's
is.
really interesting. It's very creative, and I think nothing like I've ever seen. And
Yeah.
I just feel privileged to be a part of this.
What of yourself do you see in DHH?
Say that again.
What of yourself do you see in the character you're playing in this piece?
What do I see of myself
Yeah.
in him? Well, let me first say that one of the things I really, really admire about David that comes out in DHH that I get to explore is a little humility. He can be very self-deprecating, and it comes across in the piece, where he is not scared to make himself look absurd, to be self-critical, to be able to look at himself and say, oh, there's a little hubris there, I need to knock that down, you know. I think that comes across, I think, very clearly in his writing. And I think the same of myself. Steve, you need to get off your high horse. You know, come on, take a look around, see what's going on. And I think that's certainly something that I'm very grateful for, that I get to kind of experience with each show. That sense of we're just human. We do things that are ridiculous. We say things that embarrass ourselves. We behave in ways that we may wish others did not see, but they do. And that's just a part of being human. And that's okay if we can laugh at ourselves. And hopefully those who come to see the show will learn to laugh.
Yeah, yes.
You know, laugh at the absurdity of how we as Americans, how we as people, as political beings, can laugh at our own absurdity.
I love it. And yeah, questions from online.
This is from David. He says, the show and your performance in it are brilliant. You're off stage for a pretty long time in the second half of the show. Is that a challenge? How do you approach that?
So yeah, to recap, brilliant performance, and you're off stage for a large chunk of the second half. Is it a challenge in any way to be out of the action for a bit?
Well, I may be out of the action on stage, but I'm not off stage. And what I mean by that is when I'm even in my dressing room and I have a monitor so that I can see what's going on stage, I'm watching the show. One of the things that we explored in the rehearsal period that ended up getting changed for the final production was in that whole latter half of the show where I just disappear from the stage, I used to actually be on stage watching. That was something that we were exploring during the rehearsal process, because ultimately this is David's fever dream. And I think one of the things that we were exploring is wanting the audience to not forget that.
Yeah.
To not get lost in what was going on and thinking suddenly we were no longer in a dream, but it was real when it wasn't. So to answer the question, it's important to me to keep listening to the show, because I think when I return, I've seen it. All those things I talk about in the final scene of the show, I kind of reference these scenes in which I was not on stage. So I think for me as an actor, even in my dressing room, as I'm watching the show go along before I make my next entrance, I need to be aware of what's going on in this character's brain, because it is there when I come back, even if the audience doesn't see me experiencing it.
That makes total sense. Another online question. Yes.
This person said that they listened to the recording before they saw the production this past Sunday, and it seemed that the changes in the score itself were subtle. Do you agree with
So has the score changed less than the book, would you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We were very, very fortunate to have with us through the entire process. Now, Janine Tesori was not able to join us until previews. So the first few weeks of rehearsal, we were fortunate to have Chris Fennick, who is Janine's associate on many of her productions. And he was part of the original production, et cetera, with all the music. And so very much aware, so very much in contact with Janine during the process, and just kind of being aware in those subtle moments where the music might have needed adjustment, if there were cuts, how that happened. But the musical changes are, I would say, minimal. Really, the crux of the differences between our production and, say, the production in New York, which is the original cast album, is the New York production. Much of the lyrics are different. A lot of the scenes, some of the scenes are similar, but there's a lot of really pointed lines that really shift the directions of the scenes. So it was pretty much the book and lyrics that made a lot of differences. If you listen to the cast recording, one of the songs that I sing, I Am, a lot of it's similar, but there's a very, very important part of this at the end of the song that's very different from the original cast recording. I won't talk about what that is because you need to come visit it, see it. But for those who have seen the show, if you listen to the end of that song, you will hear different lyrics. And hopefully the lyric changes reflect more of where David wanted the scene to go, where we kind of discovered during rehearsal that the lyrics weren't working or they weren't delivering what they had wanted it to deliver. So there was just changes. And where we are now, you'll notice that if you get to know the show well enough, this version, you'll hear differences from the original cast album, particularly with lyrics. But many of the book scenes have changed, or rather been adjusted. A lot of new lines.
And a tremendous amount of cuts, too.
Yes, tremendous amount of cuts. It's no longer a 2-act show. It is a 1-act show. Where the act break used to be, now Ethan really worked at massaging the transition from what used to be the end of Act 1 into Act 2. The whole sequence, the play sequence, the structure of the show is you have a play, and within that play, there's a musical. The show starts as a play before it goes into. The play portion in our production is significantly shorter than it was in the original production, for very good reason, which David and Janine were really, really, really working on for our production.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Do you like being in a show like this where it is still evolving? Is there a particular attraction to you to be part of this?
Oh, yes. I've been very fortunate in my career to have had the opportunity to do new works, in addition to works that have been well established and not changing. But again, the word privilege. I'm so privileged to be in the room with the writer who is taking what I'm giving and merging it with his own work and deciding, oh, maybe it's better to do it this way. Maybe it's better to say this line this way, etc. And to know that I'm actually providing a contribution to the finished piece. David was very, very generous in saying to us at the end of our rehearsal period, he said that, the show has changed so much from its New York version that in many ways we should, not that we can, but we should consider ourselves an original cast.
Wow. Wow.
Because the show has gone through so many changes that in his eyes, this is a very different piece than it was. And so just that knowledge is very humbling, and hopefully that means that in my own way I've been able to provide a contribution to this finished piece, more than just interpreting, but actually creating.
That's great. Please.
Going forward, did the creators consider the show frozen?
Do you think the show's done?
I don't know.
That didn't-
Ultimately, I from what I understand from conversations with them, that they're very pleased. They're very pleased and very satisfied with where we landed. Now, I don't know if that means in any way they think it's finished, because as writers, as creators, you can just keep, you can just keep chipping it away. And there are always, I'm not speaking for them, but I would say for most writers, there's always more you can work on, or there's always more that you want to refine. It's not quite there, and I haven't figured it out. But because this is live theater, there's a deadline. You have to finish it by a certain point, which means the willingness to say, I have to let that rest. I've got other things I need to work on. So my point is, I don't know. I have no idea. But it's very satisfying to know that the writers, the creators, were very pleased about where we landed.
You had a question as well?
Are there parts of the original production that you wish you'd been able to do?
Okay. Are there things that have been cut that you wish were something you'd be able to be a part of?
Well, I'll put it this way. It's always thrilling and an honor to be a part of something, even when it doesn't work, when it's developing. So the familiarity I have with the original production, there were elements of it that I thought were very exciting and very creative and very challenging, that I thought, wow, that would be really amazing to be a part of, really fulfilling, very satisfying, that were determined not to work for this version, which is why it had to get cut. There is a really, what used to be the beginning of Act 2 of the original production was a panel. There was a panel discussion that it was brilliantly written. Janine has even mentioned, she has lamented out loud that unfortunately that had to get cut because it was so impactful, so well written, but it didn't serve this piece. So rather than putting in something wonderful that doesn't help the piece, it's better to remove it, because otherwise it might become a distraction. So seeing things like that, experiencing things like that, I would think, wow, that would have been wonderful to be a part of, to get to explore, to see how it worked, but also know why it was removed.
David, and then we'll go to online. Yes.
Looking at your bio, I see you've done a wide range of roles. You've done a lot of Shakespeare. And one thing that we all know is that more recently, opportunities are opening much more widely for Asian American actors. So this is the quintessential question of an actor. What is your bucket list role that you haven't done? And it can be Shakespearean or modern comedy or something else by DHH. What would you do if you could be the producer and say, as the producer, Mr. Eng, we want you to do this role?
Dream roles.
Dream roles. Well, I don't necessarily, and this doesn't help your answer. I don't necessarily have a dream role. However, I will say that one particular project that I'm actually very proud of, that is very much in process, I worked with a very good friend of mine, a really, really talented composer. His name's Jonathan Fadner. Um, we, I created, cut, adapted into a five-person version of Shakespeare's Richard II, which I think is some of the most beautiful language I have ever encountered. And so it was always kind of a dream of mine to play Richard. So in my own way, I took that play, I cut it down, I turned it into 5 actors with me playing Richard. And I had my friend Jonathan write original music. So I kind of had to learn to play guitar. I don't play guitar. But I had to he wrote the music well enough that I can kind of pluck a few things on the guitar so we could turn Shakespeare II into a musical as well. And I designed it with like 15 puppets, wow, and that were being handled by the other 4 actors, because the idea of the play is that you have this divinely anointed king who throughout the course of the play is brought down. By the end, he discovers he's just a man.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did a workshop of it, meaning, just we got some funding for it. We did a production, we did a workshop of it, just try it out. That's something that I want to go back and keep doing. When you have roles like that, that I think, wow, there's just so much to dig inside of that. That is just thrilling. And then have music with it and puppetry, which I think is just so theatrical and so thrilling for audiences to watch, really well done puppets. So that would be, off the top of my head, a dream fulfilled, if that could ever really get off the ground.
We see it here at Signature.
I don't want to, I tell my students, I also teach, I tell my students, don't box yourself in. Don't box yourself in. Don't tell yourself, oh, I'm just going to be a classical actor. Oh, I'm just going to do musicals. Do whatever moves you, whatever you feel compelled to do, because it really makes you feel alive. And so I thought for this Richard II, I thought, I'm going to do it all. Yeah. I'm going to put together this Shakespeare. I'm going to play it. And I directed it too. So I was Richard. I directed it. I adapted it. And I want to sing, and I want to try to play the guitar.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. There were some online questions. Okay.
What are your favorite roles that you've played?
Okay, so so favorite roles done so far.
Oh, yeah. Several come to mind, actually. Really special to me. Back in 2017, the off-Broadway production of Pacific Overtures.
I saw it. It was fantastic.
Thank you. I know Pacific Overtures was done here last year, and I so wanted to see it. I had a hotel room, I had a car rental, and then I got picked for jury duty last second.
No.
I got picked. I had to serve, not just go into to go in. I got picked. So that all had to get canceled, so I didn't get to see it. But when I did Pacific Overtures off-Broadway back in 2017, that was really quite special. For those who saw it, who know the show, I played Kayama. So I got to sing the glorious bowler hat, among other things in the show. And Mr. Sondheim was there. Saw the show several times. In fact, it was the scariest thing. Our final dress rehearsal, which was not invitation, there was nobody allowed it. It was not invited. It was just a closed final dress rehearsal. Was just Mr. Sondheim, John Weidman, and John Doyle, our director. That was scary. Yeah. We were backstage going, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. It was scarier than anything else, was that final dress rehearsal. But the show is very dear to me. And so, and I worked with so many wonderful people. The honor of getting to meet Mr. Sondheim, to get to talk to him. And some really special memories there. Something that comes to mind too, not necessarily a role, but certainly a theatrical experience. Early in my career, once I moved to New York in the mid-90s, to be an actor. And then after about a year, I got hired for the German production of Miss Saigon. And I didn't speak German. The show was in German. But they were doing worldwide tours for their show. At that time, they had a lot of money. And they came through New York, and I got hired. The show was in its third year. I picked up my bags after having just moved to New York a year and a half earlier, moved to Europe, and had 6 weeks of phonetics lessons where they taught me the show in German. And they taught me, I didn't speak German. I didn't know what I was doing. But part of the audition was how well my ear could pick up the sounds. So in the final callback, Klaus Wilhelm, who was the music director, he said, okay, can you say this? He said a few words in German. And I said, I did my best to imitate it. He said, okay, now can you sing it? So I said, okay. So I tried to sing it. And I remember very clearly him, after I sang it, he just turned to the table. He said, yeah, he can do it. I was like, oh. So I went to Germany. So I eventually understudied a role. I went as an ensemble, but the experience was just eye-opening for me to get to live and work in Europe just as an actor. I was on a visa. I couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
I was just an actor. To live somewhere, to perform in a language I didn't speak. So, of course, I had to eventually gradually learn German. I'm not fluent. Don't test me. That was certainly one of my highlights as something that really impacted the person, the actor I've become.
Love it. Did you have a question in the back? Did I see your hand earlier? Yes.
I was wondering what your biggest challenge was for soft power and what's your most challenging role?
Okay, so challenges of soft power. Let's handle that first.
Challenges of soft power. I would say, off the top of my head, my biggest challenge was to try to seem human. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of wonderful opportunities that David has written to really wink at the audience, to say, isn't this funny? Isn't this funny? And this is funny. And to not do that. To trust that the audience is going to laugh without me telling the audience to laugh. And that's certainly one of the biggest challenges that I keep learning when I do comedy is can I play it and let the audience decide it's funny because they relate to it, as opposed to the audience saying, oh, that's a funny joke, but them to say, them laughing because they're like, oh, that's really human. I know that feeling. Does that make sense? So just because, even with each new rewrite, and I'm reading the page, seeing what the new lines are, thinking, oh my God, that's really funny. Yeah. How do I not play the comedy? How do I not play this? Oh, the actor knows it's funny. I hope the audience laughs. As opposed to, can I be truthful to that line and trust that experience from the audience is what's going to make it funny? And that's always a challenge for playing comedy. Some actors are just really good at, yuck yuck and the audience is going to laugh. I don't think I am. I don't think. So that's probably my biggest challenge in soft power.
And then the follow-up was the most challenging roles you've had thus far? Oh,
yeah. Oh, goodness. This was just like 2 years ago. I did a play called Hold These Truths. And it is about the 1940s, a Supreme Court case, Gordon Hirabayashi versus the United States. He was a Japanese American who resisted internment. And because of that, he ended up going to jail and all that because he refused to go to internment. and it ended up becoming a famous Supreme Court case, which he lost, by the way. But anyway, the playwright, Jeannie Cicada, wonderful playwright, wrote this one-person show, this one-person play. And it is the only time I've ever... That's not true, actually. This is the first time I did a one-person play that went to full production. Mm. And so it was a 90-minute play with just me talking the whole time. At the beginning of the play, as I'm waiting for the cue light to step onto the stage, I'm just thinking, okay, once I start, I don't stop until 90 minutes later. And you know, if you get lost, just find your way back. So there was a lot of fear there, because partway through the rehearsal period, I remember 3 weeks into the rehearsal, I had a 4-week rehearsal. 3 weeks in, I remember thinking, I'm still getting lost. Can I do this? This is the first time I've ever thought, I don't know if I can do this. There's just too many words. Mm-hmm. There are just so many words. And there was over 30-something characters that I had to play. And it was an empty stage. It was a tiny little stage. And I just walked back and forth. And the hardest thing about it, not just the technical, can I learn these lines? Can I remember the blocking? Can I remember what I'm playing? The hardest part of it is, can I relax enough to just play the scene? Yeah. Can I do it? Can I find this human being? That is the hardest part, because I'm so concerned about all these technical elements, not messing up, not getting lost. There's so many scenes. Do I remember what scene comes next? Do I remember what character I'm playing next? You know, aside from all those technical elements, can I really deliver the humanity of this character or these characters? Which is my ultimate job. My ultimate job is to take the audience on an experience of this human being and to try to empathize, try to understand what this human being went through fighting the Supreme Court, much of America, who believed that Japanese Americans or anyone of Japanese descent belonged in these internment camps for their own safety. Could I actually get the audience to understand that, to feel that? And that was probably my biggest challenge. I will say, I don't know if I cracked that nut. Huh. And it was really, I remember thinking the fourth final week of the run, just thinking, oh wow, I'm actually starting to relax. I'm not so scared, am I gonna really mess up? But rather, I was able to say, wow, if I mess up, I'll find my way back. I'll be fine. Because I don't have another actor to act with. Yeah. And for many scenes, you depend on the partnership of you and your co-actor to take each other along, to move the story ahead. And when I didn't have that, it was just me. And if I get lost, which during rehearsal, I got lost. I had no idea what was next. I had to just stop, try to figure it out, and let the stage manager said, this is the next line. Oh yeah, that's right. But it was only until the fourth week, my final week, that I actually start to feel, I can do this. And then the show was over. Of course. And then the show was over. So that's probably, I don't know if I necessarily want that challenge again because it's so scary. It's so scary, but I knew that was good for me. Yeah. I knew that was good for me to be confronted with something that I had no choice but to overcome, even though I was full of self-doubt at many points along the way.
We're just about out of time. Final question of the day. You're up on that stage at Soft Power or any show that you've been a part of. How does acting feed you? How does performing feed your soul? What does it do for you?
Oh, goodness. I consider it one of the noblest things I could do. And I say that because I think the privilege of doing something and encouraging people to feel, to really feel something, not necessarily dictating what they're supposed to feel, but to get them to feel, particularly in a society where we're taught feeling makes you vulnerable. Feeling leaves you up for being attacked or being threatened. I think that being able to do that, I think, is one of the most honorable things I can do. And so doing something like Soft Power, when I feel the audience responding, it's not just a high. I feel like I'm doing something important because I am actually, people are allowing themselves to be taken along for the ride and to feel something. When people tell me their own experience of crying at the end of the show, for example, when they, not that you have to cry, but if people are having that experience, I feel like, good job. I've done the profession some justice, you know. I think that is our function, is the theater, is to get people to feel, give them permission to feel things which they may be afraid to feel or resist feeling, and hopefully think as well. Hopefully our show does that.
It does. Thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us.
Thanks.
We'll see you again in October. Enjoy the rest of your day. Okay.